Hello everyone! In this tutorial, I'll show you how to make your own square neck baby doll top. There will be a link in the description so you can find the pattern and instructions to make your own beautiful baby doll top. This pattern has two different back design options. Option A has a slightly higher neckline for the back. Option B has a lower neckline for the back and a tie. This pattern also has different sleeve options: full, 3/4, mid, and short. You can cut out your paper patterns, but hold off from cutting the facing until after you've sewn your front and back bodice pieces together. I'll be making option A in this video for the back. However, I want to show you how to make your own facing in case you want to make option B, or in case you want to make the neckline shorter or longer around your neck and still make option A without the tie. For option A, make sure that you're sewing the shoulder pieces at exactly 0.5 inches away from the edge so that the facing that is included with this pattern fits exactly around the neckline. If it fits, you can move on to the next step. Otherwise, I'll show you how to create your own facing for option B or any other deviation. To see if your facing fits, place the two bodice pieces flat like this, then place the facing on top of the neckline. Use the inner square or rectangle that came in the middle of the facing to check for any spacing between the edges and corners of the square. The square will fit exactly inside your neckline to make option A as long as you follow the instructions exactly. But for this video, I deviated the measurements to show you how to make the facing for option B or any measurement deviation from the instructions to create option A for the back. Once you've traced your neckline onto another piece of fabric, add 3 inches on the front and back sides and 2 inches on the shoulder sides. This will be your facing. Cut out the inner square or rectangle so that you have a border that you can add on top of your neckline. If the facing pattern for option A fits your neckline, you don't have to make your own facing. You can just pin it and sew it on the right side of your bodice, which we will eventually do. Working on the right side of your fabric, place the border that you've created or the facing on top. Pin down the facing and sew around the edges at exactly 0.5 inches. A clear ruler can help you figure out how far away 0.5 inches is from the edge. I'm using a 2.5 straight stitch, and in order to sew around the inner edges continuously, I am lifting the footer at the corners and turning my fabric so that I can continue all the way around my neckline. Once you've sewn your facing onto your bodice, cut the inner corners, but be careful and don't go over the stitch path that you've just made. Now fold over all of the corners of your facing inside the neckline and flip the entire bodice so that now you're working on the wrong side. Once you've flipped your bodice with the facing attached, straighten everything out on the wrong side, then fold in half one of the shoulder side flaps, pin it, and sew it in place, as I'm about to show you. We're going to sew the flap down with a straight stitch. I'm using a 3.0 stitch length. I'm repeating everything that I did on the other shoulder side. Once the sides have been sewn in place, repeat the same steps, but on the front and back sides of your facing, fold in half, pin and sew, so that you make a border around your neckline. This is what the border should look like before it is sewn onto the bodice. Cut off the excess fabric underneath the border so that the neckline hem is not bulky. Be careful to not cut the stitching. Before sewing your facing onto your bodice, you can add lace to the inner front flap. This part is optional. Here I am preparing the lace by sewing the sides so that they don't fray. Now I am pinning the lace onto the front flap and making sure that the pins are not touching the bodice, just the lace and the front flap. Measure how much of your lace is showing on the front and make sure it is evenly pinned in place on the front flap that's on the wrong side. Then sew the lace with a straight stitch and sew the sides as well. I'm going to sew the lace a second time, but more to the right, and then a third time, but more to the left, with a straight stitch so that the lace is very secure on the fabric. After sewing the lace, or after skipping that part, you can add pins all around the neckline border. Adjust your pins as needed before sewing around your neckline to get them to be where you would sew. Before you start sewing, double check the front and back sides or the wrong and right sides of the fabric to check for evenness so that the stitching you make looks neat on the front. I used a 3.5 stitch length and took my time around the neckline so that the stitching that I would do was even. Don't rush this part because it is very important. When I get to a corner, I'll lift the footer, rearrange the fabric, put the footer down again, and continue sewing so that there isn't a break in between the stitching. Sew your sleeves with the same seam allowance, then make small notches on your sleeves to mark the middle point. This is where your shoulders are going to be. These notches are going to help you sew the sleeve on to the bodice. Once you have made your sleeves, sew the sides of the bodice and make the bodice shoulder holes the same measurement as your sleeve shoulder holes. Use the notches as guides to help you match up the sleeve onto the bodice. The top notch goes with the shoulder seams, and the inner stitch path of the sleeve goes with the inner side stitch path of the bodice. Once everything is matched up right, you can sew the sleeve onto the bodice. Now we are going to attach the elastic onto the top of the second part of the bodice. Sew with a zigzag stitch, and as you sew, pull the elastic slightly. Cut off any excess fabric from the edges, then fold the top part once and sew down the middle of the elastic and fabric. I used a straight stitch at a 4.0 stitch length. Repeat these steps for both parts, then put them together and sew them on the sides. Make small notches at the midpoints to connect the top and bottom parts. Use the notches as guides to help you match up as accurately the middle parts of the top and bottom. Match the top part to the bottom part as accurately as you can with pins before you start sewing. Sew to the left of the zigzag stitch that's on the elastic and stay on the elastic as you sew the two parts together. Make sure to pull the elastic part as you sew it onto the other part. I used a 3.5 length straight stitch for this part, and I sewed twice all around, but the second time I sewed closer to the right. So the first time sew closer to the left on the elastic, and the second time sew closer to the right. Let's create the hem for our sleeves. I cut off 1/2 inch and reinforced the stitching. I folded the fabric 1/2 inch on the wrong side and then sewed along with a straight stitch at a 3.5 stitch length. I did that twice. Then I rounded off the corners of the bottom of the bodice because I noticed that they were not exactly round. Then I reinforced the stitching where I had just cut, similar to how I reinforced the sleeve before. To finish off the bottom, you can create another hem, or you can add lace. Measure how long the bottom of your bodice is and add 1 inch to that measurement so that you know how much lace to use. Pin in place the lace starting on the side of your top. Then connect both strands of your lace together before starting to sew the lace on top of your fabric with a zigzag stitch. After the zigzag stitch, I went over the lace and fabric again with a straight stitch onto the left side. We're going to sew one more time on top of the lace on the wrong side. To keep the lace on the fabric, use a 4.0 stitch length and take your time doing this so that the small hem you create is even. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope this tutorial was helpful. You can find the PDF sewing pattern and instructions in the description below. Check out the links in my bio to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and to check out my stores. Subscribe for more videos like this, and I will see you in the next one.